Hi, good morning. Outcome one, and in that we have covered things like the leadership theories. We've covered the managerial styles, difference between leaders and managers, and then we also looked at motivational theories and how managers use motivation and motivational theories and put them into practice within the organization. And then what we have looked at is the characteristic of how the culture and the culture of the culture and structure of the organization influences and what kind of an impact it has on the organization. So today, continuing that theme of learning outcome 2, what I'm looking at doing is going through a few deck of slides which will basically cover details of LO2, and in which we will look at tasks like 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3 with regards to the different organizational structures. What role do they play in the organization? How does it influence the power and authority within the organization for a leader, probably a manager, and how these structures then effectively help leaders and managers to achieve the aims and objectives set by the management or the board for the organization. So this is a presentation to send over session, and through in terms of getting a bit more details in terms of theory. With regards to the book, we have the ebook, which is Organization and Behavior on the Learning Management System, Moodle, wherein you'll have to go through the pages which are relevant, and I will explain that and point that out towards the end of the lecture. So let's look at the first learning objective in terms of what is an organizational structure and design, and let's look at now. Practically, most of us have worked within the organizations, and we do see that a lot of organizations are characterized by type of hierarchy or structure that they have within a particular department or within a particular branch office or within a particular site within the organization. So an organization structure is the way in which jobs are organized within a firm, and this is let's take an example here. Now, when I say you're working within, say, the administration department would have a manager at the top, and he would have, a few colleagues working with him, supporting that particular function. So there would be somebody at the reception, there would be somebody who works within the accounts department, looks after the administration on account side, and there might be somebody within the HR function who looks after the HR side, like payroll, and appraisals and things like that. And this function then kind of constitutes something like an administration function with various people working under the manager. So this is an example of an organization structure. And this kind of a structure, when you look at, is basically a grouping of people into departments or sections, and that have a collective responsibility of delivering a particular service within that organization. So if I look at just extending that example of the administration department in a large organization like, say, Microsoft, that is considered, some of the functions which are not frontline functions and not dealing directly with customers are considered administration or administrative functions, and in which you have departments like the HR, which is human resources. You have a department like accounts and payroll. You also have the admin department, which is the administration department like travel, and the booking agent or ticketing agent will be a department within the organization which manages travel and ticketing and booking for its employees, corporate employees, when they travel on official tours or jobs. And this kind of a structure basically looks at departments. So within the HR department, under administration, you'll have a vice president of administration, and underneath that, you'll have a general manager in HR, you'll have a general manager in accounts and payroll, you'll have a general manager in facilities, which will look after the office building. Will also have a sub department within that which will look after ticketing and booking, and that tends to be that's how the allocation of responsibility is. Let's look at a question, which is why have a structure? Now, all businesses have to organize functions. They have to organize jobs, responsibilities, and roles. And in order to organize them in a better, easier, more efficient and productive way, the organizations look at kind of developing structures for those functions which are done regularly and which are critical for the business in terms of both its productivity, achievement of goals and objectives throughout the year. The structure of the organization arises from the need to delegate power. Now, why is the structure required is, if you think of an example that every time you have a decision to be made, or if, for example, money has to be spent, you would not want to go across to the organization's board or the chief executive to get that sanction. So structures are created within organizations wherein there's a bit of delegation of power, and delegation of power brings in authority, and it also brings in authority brings in the resources and the money budgeting resources requirements, which the managers are then able to use to effectively function and achieve that objective. An example briefly here would be that if you are working within a marketing or a sales department and you look at promotions to do a bit of outreach to your customers, then there is a fixed allocated budget which is available with the head of marketing or the head of that department, and he or she is able to then quite effectively delegate and plan the budgeting which is required to do an outreach. It could be an event that you're hosting, it could be maybe a participation in a roadshow, it could be a flyer campaign that you're doing, but that sanction and delegation of authority happens because of the structure and because the manager has that authority from the board or from the chief executive to be able to spend that money to try and achieve the business objectives of increasing sales, profitability and footfall, say, of customers, or buying more of its products in this case. Then what we also look at is one of the other parameters which comes across is that power and authority is also something which is related to how the organization structure and design is. And let's look at defining the word authority. The authority is basically defined as the right which a manager has, or to be able to direct or supervise its subordinates and peers within that department. And the authority also means a flow in terms of a chain of command which is vested in that position and not the person. So when you look at somebody coming into becoming a head of marketing, has the authority or has the right to be able to plan for a budget and obviously execute that marketing budget to be able to achieve objectives. A lot of peers or colleagues which work within that department under the head of marketing report to him, and obviously he is responsible for providing them direction and also looking at appraisals towards the end of the year and things like that. So that comes in from the power of position of authority, and that authority is related to the position and not to the person. The second parameter which we look at when we look at organizational structures is power. Now, power is defined as the ability to influence behavior of others. So when you join a particular company, you normally do find that you receive an induction or you receive an employee handbook. And that handbook, when you receive, gives you the do's and don'ts of what is expected of you in your job role and obviously in terms of your behavior. So they might have things like your dress code, for example, your attendance. They might have things like, which are related to the aspects of how you conduct business and how you represent the company, when you work in that particular department and represent the company in front of their customers. So power may come from being in a management position, may come if you're an exceptional performer, and that gives you a bit of power because the company rewards you and gives you more job, increases your job role and obviously increases your responsibility, and that helps you get a bit more power. And that's when they say your position yields more power, is a phrase that we normally see used within the corporate context. And that is also one of the things which kind of affects, is the outcome, direct outcome of, the organizational structure when we look at it. Let's look at the other aspect of, organizations. Obviously, all companies and organizations are formed of people. One of the key resources in today's world is obviously people or human resource. And these, this particular resource then kind of yields three different kind of relationships within the organization. Now, when you have staff or peers or colleagues working within the organization, sometimes they are referred to as, working within the line function. some of them are referred to as working as staff, and some of them are working with you from a functional aspect. This in a bit more detail. So when you look at the line relationship structure, there is a direct line of authority between the top manager and down to the operative. So if you look at a manufacturing floor or an engineering example in terms of a production floor, the line manager, which is basically supervising, say, the assembly line, directly deals with each and every employee's, from an aspect of, giving out instructions. Similarly, because of that relationship, everybody is quite clear that they are all reporting to him directly. All roles and responsibilities are given to the person by that line manager directly, and that is what constitutes the line function. Let's look at another example wherein line structures are more. Where are they used? They are more often used in small organizations, when obviously the organizations are small, in the sense that you look at organizations wherein it is not a large organization. Number of employees could be anywhere between 10 to 50, and they tend to be wherein you have a direct access to most of the employees or staff within the organization, because the business in terms of its context is small. An example of that would be, say, law firms. You look at small shops. When you look at cash and carry shops in the UK, you look at small businesses, which could be hair salons, which could be training companies, which could be accountants, and things like that. Now, line structures have a very fairly, it's right to say that they have a fairly informal, culture, as because of the staff, the company size being small, most of the staff knows each other quite, well, and they are able to deal with them more effectively in terms of, executing the jobs and the roles and responsibilities. This is an example of a line structure that you see in terms of where you have an owner or a director of the company, and underneath him, he could be the manager himself and he takes on that role, or they could be a manager, and obviously within a small shop, you have a cashier on the till, and then you have several sales assistants or people who are on the sales floor. So it's an example of a line structure wherein it's quite clear that the structure is quite flat, and there are not many hierarchies or hierarchical linkages between the top man or the owner and the manager and down to the employee. So there is one-on-one kind of management which happens between the employee and the manager, or the staff and the. Now, let's look at how line structures kind of affect relationships within the organization. Now, line structures are for smaller firms, and obviously they could also be implemented within larger firms. It's not to say that they are only small firms, but they could also be implemented within larger firms. Now, this structure could be within a particular department. So when you look at a large company wherein there is a complex hierarchical or matrix structure, which we're going to come to in a minute, but imagine a department, like I mentioned to you before, like the administration department, and within that you have HR, you have, say, for example, facilities, and you have, accounts and payroll. Then in those departments, you will normally get to see a line structure which is kind of implemented. Now, staff relationships, sometimes when you look at, functional structures, that means if a company like, I'll take the example of Microsoft here, which has a lot of products. Like they have the gaming products like Xbox, they have Windows operating system, which will have a lot of different products like Windows 10, 7, and things like that. And they also have, the web products like MSN, which is a search engine and things like that. So here, what you tend to normally get to see is that in these structures, you will primarily see that the staff works within a particular function, and they are kind of responsible for, looking at maintaining and working within that function. And that function basically helps you and the manager, the line manager, to be able to manage that particular function to produce an effective output. And an example here, which I would quote, would be, again, if you imagine the situation wherein you're working within a factory, and you look at the production floor, the production manager is then able to delegate and manage functions within, 2 or 3 of his line managers, looking at managing lines. So if you imagine a car assembly line, you'll have a production manager on that line, which is managing a shift of 8 hours. And what you'll get to see is that within that shift of 8 hours, There will be, a person who will coordinate with him from the personal or HR department to ensure that all staff has come in and they are able to take positions for their shift. And there will be a supervisor who will manage the line in terms of making sure that the line is able to progress well and effectively complete the tasks given in that shift within the production floor. So that kind of a relationship when you see between a production shift, a production manager within a shift, between the HR and the supervisor on the floor, kind of brings out the relationship of brings out the example of a staff relationship. Now, what we will look at is that in this particular function, because it's a big department, you will normally get to see that the persons working under the production manager do not have any authority, and that authority basically then does not translate into the ability to be able to delegate jobs. So that's a key differentiation between line structure and a structure which is created on the basis of staff. This is an example of a line structure which has staff structure implemented within it. When you have a director, you have a works manager, which is the production manager, and then he's dealing with a lot of different departments to ensure that his shift is able to work well, and he's able to basically plan that particular shift quite well in terms of making sure that that particular shift is able to produce a number of cars or progress that particular thing for. Lastly, let's look at functional relationship. So when we organize jobs which are grouped by the nature of their work, then we classify them as functional relationship. So for example, when you look at two people working within the same department, say marketing, finance, or HR, and there are a number of colleagues working within the same department, what we tend to then see is that they are related and working parallel to each other as peers, and that is because of the functional structure. And that functional structure means that they are within the same department, they have the same roles and responsibilities, but because the function is large enough, then they are managing individually certain aspects of that function within the department. So example here would be you have a large marketing department within the organization, and I'll again stick to the example of Microsoft. What you'll normally get to see, the head of marketing will be the person who supervises everything and is responsible at the end of the day. But under him, you'll have different marketing managers. So you'll have somebody who's looking after advertising, there's somebody who's looking after social media advertising, there's somebody who's looking after print advertising, there's somebody who's looking after events, and there's somebody who's looking after, say for example, below the line BTL advertising. But they're all working together to be able to achieve the same function, same objective, and they are a part of the same department, and that is why this relationship is called a functional relationship. So sometimes you'll get to see the organizations are grouped together from a point of view of functional structures, and they could be across jobs, and they could be within a particular department or within a particular branch office of a company. And functional structures basically specialize in similar skills. That means if I go back to the same example of a number of marketing managers working under the head of marketing, they have similar skills in terms of similar academic and vocational knowledge in terms of that particular function, which is the field of marketing, but they are employing it in different areas of different areas of marketing, which will be things like social marketing, social media marketing, it will be like print marketing, or say below the line marketing and things, or events marketing in that case. And that is why it's grouped together under a functional structure, because they come back, they all come from the same background, and their role is effectively to manage the functions within that department and to help the organization goals and objectives. And this is an example of a functional structure that you get to see. Obviously, these are implemented in large organizations, as you can see, and each of the department becomes a function, and they kind of work within their departments and their site offices or branch offices to be able to effectively work and deliver on the commitments and goals and objectives which have been set by. We will look at a class activity, and obviously for that, what I'll do is I'll pass on the slide to you. So what you have to do is essentially think of a large organization and think of the various structures which are there within the organization. It could be a matrix, hierarchical, functional, or a line structure, and then use that structure to be able to bring that out into your assignment when you cover learning outcome 2. Now, the other forms of how we organize structures within the organization are functional. Line and staff is the one way of doing it. The other way of doing it would be your hierarchical matrix and flow. the differentiation between the three is basis the definitions which are on the slides that you can see. And here, hierarchical structures are in large organizations. When you look at banks, for example, you look at all the retailing organizations like Tesco's and ASDA, you will find a pyramid structure wherein you have a top boss, which then, or a board which translates everything into objectives, goals, and that is set at the end, at the beginning of each year. And slowly and gradually, those functions are then drilled down to different levels of management to be able to help the organization achieve, let's put it this way, achieve the objective. It's an example of a hierarchical structure that you see, which is in a large organization. And this is what I would expect you to draw in your example when you take up a particular organization to do the tasks in the learning outcome. There are certain advantages which are listed here for hierarchical structure, and one of them which normally we look at is the main, is that the authority, or basically the line of function, is quite clear. That means you have a very specific job description, and you know where your work starts and where your work ends, and then that work is then taken over by a different colleague or a different person in a department to progress that further. So here the advantage is that the line of authority. One of the disadvantages is that because it's a large structure, sometimes communications, across the departments can be poor, and response times in some cases, kind of lag behind. And that is why when you look at, say for example, here it would be when you look at banking in particular, one of the key things that they map is the customer needs and the customer, service time. When in house service, how quickly they are able to service your requirement and come back to you on your query. And that is the response time that they measure, is because within the services industry, when you find hierarchical structure, sometimes they do see that the decision making, happens in a different department, but the front line in terms of the customer services will basically they will have to liaison with different departments to be able to come back to you with a clear and concise answer. So communication and response times are negatives or drawbacks when we look at structure. Very briefly, let's look at concluding today, which would be look at matrix structure. The matrix structure is when you have employees which report into two or more managers. So let's look at an organization of example of Microsoft as an organization, which I picked up earlier. Now, if you look at the Windows operating team, so for example, the operating system, there is a Windows product manager who sits in the US, but that product manager will also have his colleagues sitting within other geographies like Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. And they will then feed back into the demand and the requirements of what the product requires in that particular region for implementation. Example of that would be, say, a language pack. Now, predominantly within Africa and Middle East, they would want, say, Arabic or some other language implementation to be done on that. But that is then fed back from the product manager in Middle East to the product manager or the head of product function in United States, or the headquarters of the company. So here, what you get to see is you have the same person who's also managing kind of the similar function within a different geography, but he works to deliver his objectives through a matrix of peers or colleagues in this case, but they all work on the same platform. That means they're all responsible for the Windows operating system as a product. And a good example of that would be that you get to see employees within the matrix structure working on a project. So if you imagine a building site, everybody is working within the building site, but their single objective is within the project to get this building or get that particular construction done in a particular point in time. And that is where you get to see that there's a matrix structure wherein the employees are working within a particular department, but they might also be dealing with several other departments or colleagues within the other parts of the organization, and that is why it constitutes a matrix structure. And here the key function is, the key focus is always on the completion of the job, the achievement of the task. And that is why organizations kind of organize departments with a matrix structure, is to ensure that there is on-time delivery of the job or the goal and objective is achieved by the organization year on year or month on month or week. And this is an example of an organizational structure that you see on the screen. So there would be different project managers working on a similar product, but their main function would be to try and ensure that the delivery of that product happens seamlessly across markets and it meets the requirements of the customers. So in a US market, the English pack would be US English. In the European market, it could be UK English, and in the Middle Eastern market, it could be Arabic and also English. But the implementation slightly differs. So they are all working on the same objective of promoting Windows as a platform. But because they all work as Windows product managers, their key objectives are within that particular segment or within that particular geography, and that is organized as a organization. So that is where we look at the matrix structure. Now, the disadvantages of matrix structure are that sometimes the individual gets a lot of independence, or they have a lot of freedom to be able to make decisions. So timelines get shifted, and sometimes projects and costs go overboard because they have to ensure that each and every requirement of the region or each and every requirement of the customization has to be accounted for before the product is actually released into the market. So an example here would be that Windows might not release Windows 10 or Windows 11 in the market without having the minimum language packs across which are required for launch. And even if they do a phased launch, they would still release Windows with at least say 60 or 65 languages, which is what the current existing platform of Microsoft Windows is. Now, they can't say that we'll release the new version of Windows just with English language and the other languages will be added later. So the disadvantage here would be that at times timelines get shifted, costs rise because they have to comply to be able to ensure that regional requirements of customers are met before the final product actually released. The last structure which I'm going to go to very briefly is a flat organization structure. It's a very common structure which is found in most organizations, and the reason why it is flat is that it has very few layers of management. That means it could be in a small organization wherein most of the staff has direct access to the manager or the owner of the organization, and they kind of deal with the staff more or less on a one-on-one basis. Example here would be a cash and carry, or maybe an accountancy firm or a law firm within the UK region, wherein these are small businesses. They are large businesses as well, but looking at the small nature of their businesses, the partners or the owners are able to directly deal with the, and that is why it constitutes something called a flat structure. Now, there are advantages. Most of the organizations worldwide, when they start, they're small businesses, they grow. As they grow, they start with the flat organization structure, but as they grow, they go into hierarchical, they go into matrix and functional structures. So it would be fair to say that all organizations, all businesses start with a flat structure, but slowly and gradually, as the complexities increase, the businesses increase, they expand into other geographies or regions, then the structures like hierarchical, matrix, and come in. Now, the clearest and the most fastest, the best advantage of flat structure is that there is a fast decision-making process because the employees are able to get access to the management quicker. There is good and effective communication between management and workers because of the flat organization. There are not many layers. You are able to communicate directly, and that is where these are the advantages. The disadvantages being workloads on employees can sometimes be quite high because there are lesser number of employees, and most employees end up doing multiple job roles within that organization, and that is where you find that work balance life kind of things shift to provide a bit of disadvantage side of structure. Now, towards the end, what I would ask you to do is obviously look at the learning outcomes. Picking up an organization and looking at relating that to a particular structure and culture within the organization, and then bring across in the learning outcome tool, and when you bring across those tasks to us. So towards the end, let's look at a brief conclusion. So organization structure is nothing but a grouping of people into departments or sections, which you normally get to see for the allocation of responsibility and authority. There are three different types of relationships that we see within the organization. When you look at the culture and context in terms of structure, you have line, staff, and function. And there are three different types of structures that you see in organizations, whether it be it small, large, or medium organizations. And you will normally get to starting with flat, moving to matrix or hierarchical, and then at some times you find them intertwined between hierarchical, functional, matrix and functional, and also flat and functional structures. So lastly, very good to read bit more in terms of theory. And if you look at the book, which was organization and so if you pages, which is this one, which is pages between this participating within the organization. Four, you're looking at pages between 70 constituting reading. Come to the hope will catch up with you in the next week.